When we were asked to go into lockdown, people thought that one of the things we would all struggle with most would be a sense of loneliness, which by itself is a serious problem for many in modern life. But new research shows us that perhaps it wasn't as much of a problem as people expected. In this video, I'll talk about what the research found and what this might mean for people as we prepare for perhaps multiple periods of lockdown in the future as we wait for medications and vaccines to be developed in these coronavirus times. One of the big things we were asked to do when we entered into lockdown in many places in the world was to limit our physical interactions and distance from other people. No parties, no cafes, no bars, no family gatherings, no playdates for your kids. But one of the threats as a result of following this advice was that one of the other big public health challenges of our time would get worse, and that's loneliness, which in many places in the world is already high and something that people struggle with on a daily basis. But some recent studies carried out during these lockdowns seem to indicate that a huge increase in loneliness didn't actually happen, or at least it hasn't happened yet, or at least we haven't seen signs of it in the research. So what did they find? In one survey carried out in the USA, where people were surveyed between January and April 2020 3 times, on the loneliness measure where 1 was not very lonely and 3 being very lonely, the scores of 1,500 people aged between 18 and 98 years old were 1.69 in the first survey, 1.71 in the second survey, and 1.71 in the third survey. Which means that there was actually no statistical difference at all between those 3 time points. What they thought was going to happen, a significant and meaningful increase in loneliness, didn't happen at all. When they looked a bit closer at the data, however, they did start to uncover some interesting differences. Some people reported being newly lonely. Some felt less lonely over time. The researchers say they haven't yet looked at racial differences in the responses, but they did do an age analysis and found, as have other studies, that people 65 and older tend to be less lonely than the 18 to 64 year old group. The prevalence of loneliness in those 65 and older went from 16% in the first survey to 21% in the second survey, and then dropped back down to 18% in the third. If we think about this and consider what we found in other disasters, it's actually not that surprising that a spike in loneliness didn't happen, at least not yet. As the pandemic public health measures forced many stores and businesses to close temporarily, neighbours began to rely on each other more. Researchers at Johns Hopkins University also did their own comparisons between data gathered in March 2018 and April 2020 and found that whereas 11% of US adults reported feeling lonely in 2018, that rose to 13.8% in April 2020. A rise, but again not anywhere near as steep as some people expected. So why is this? Why aren't people reporting dramatically more loneliness at a time when most people are more physically distant from other people and normal routines than ever before? Well, the answer is we don't really know, but some researchers have put forward some ideas. That sense of solidarity that people are feeling when they are collectively under some threat together, when they are collectively going through a challenge together, seems to be a really strong protective factor, says Jonathan Cantor, psychologist. And he continues, I don't think we fully appreciated that months ago when all this started. Well, I'd agree and disagree with that. There's definitely a sense of coming together that's been found in the initial period following other disasters too. And this seems to be holding up even when people are restricted in their ability to physically come together, as demonstrated in that study. Some people have described this as an emotion graver than happiness, yet also deeply positive. There's also the idea that social pressure to participate in activities has been released somewhat. This idea of fear of missing out, or FOMO, where we track who's going to the party or who's going out to events. When everybody is staying at home, this is far less of an issue that provokes anxiety for people. But perhaps this good news is being offset somewhat by an increasing anxiety and perhaps even depression as we re-enter into community spaces and see how case numbers have started to rise again as some areas of the world head into lockdown again to try to deal with it. So this FOMO, fear of missing out, has been replaced by FOGO, the fear of going out, and increased reports of existential anxiety and pessimism as we grapple with the uncertainty of what life is going to look like in the future as we coexist with the coronavirus and seek to find other solutions like vaccines and medical treatments. It is important also to remember that, of course, we've been able to connect with each other in non-physical ways, like through Zoom, online catch-ups with family and friends in many different ways, hunting teddy bears in physically distanced ways in our local neighborhoods, and dressing up and marching in dinosaur parades. Like I said, all kinds of ways. It's healthy that we keep doing this because it is so vitally important to keep connected during a crisis, because we know that it's actually the most important factor in getting through a crisis successfully. My name's Saab Johal, and go well.